A woman spends 11 months saying nothing, smiling, making dinner, going to sleep next to a man who had been slowly transferring her inheritance into his own accounts. Then, on a single Tuesday morning, she makes 4 phone calls, and by noon, his entire plan is gone. A man discovers his landlord has been renting out the apartment above him as an illegal short-term rental, using falsified permits and his tenants' shared utilities. He documents everything for 6 months. Then he files one report. The landlord loses the building. And a senior employee finds out her manager has been submitting her research and her analysis under his own name for 3 years, presenting her work, taking her promotions. She says nothing for 60 days. Then she sends one email. Welcome to Venture and Karma. Let's get into it. Story number 1. The 4 phone calls. Margaret was 54 years old when her mother passed away. Her mother had lived carefully and deliberately for 8 decades. She had owned a small house outright, maintained a modest investment portfolio, and left behind a will that was clear, notarized, and current. She left everything to Margaret. The estate was valued at just under $300,000. Margaret had been married to her husband Dennis for 19 years. He was a charming man, social, confident, the kind of person who made friends easily in every room he entered, and who had always handled the financial side of their marriage with what Margaret had taken to be competence and care. When the estate began to transfer, Dennis offered to manage the process. He had done this with their own finances for years. Margaret was still in the acute phase of grief. She was grateful. She signed the documents he placed in front of her. Over the following 8 months, she did not look at the estate account. She trusted Dennis to manage it. She had always trusted Dennis to manage things. In the spring of the following year, Margaret was preparing their joint tax return. She needed the interest income from her mother's investments, which had been transferred into a management account Dennis had set up during the estate process. She asked him for the account statements. He told her he would get them to her. He did not get them to her. A week passed. She asked again. He said the statements were coming by mail. They did not come. Margaret called the financial institution directly. The representative on the line confirmed the account existed. She confirmed the initial transfer amount. She confirmed the current balance. The current balance was $41,000. 8 months earlier, the account had held $286,000. Margaret asked for a complete transaction history. The representative told her she would need to come in person or submit a written request with identification. Margaret drove to the branch the following morning. She sat across from an advisor and received a printed transaction history covering the 8 months since her mother's estate had transferred. She read it twice. Over those 8 months, Dennis had made 63 separate withdrawals from the account, each one sized carefully, each one timed with irregular spacing to avoid the pattern that would have appeared suspicious in a monthly review. The withdrawals totaled $245,000. Margaret sat with the printed statement for a long moment. Then she folded it, placed it in her bag, thanked the advisor, and drove home. Dennis was in his home office when she arrived. She said hello. She made lunch. She told him the statements had not arrived yet, and she would follow up with the institution later in the week. He said that sounded fine. That evening, Margaret called her sister. Not to tell her what she had found, to ask for the name of the attorney her sister had used during her own divorce 3 years earlier. She was described as thorough, efficient, and impossible to rattle. She called her the following morning. The attorney reviewed the transaction history in one meeting. She told Margaret that what Dennis had done constituted a clear case of financial elder abuse by proxy, meaning the misappropriation of a surviving relative's inherited assets by a spouse acting in a fiduciary capacity. In their state, this carried both civil and criminal exposure. She also told her that the more documentation she could gather before Dennis became aware she had discovered the withdrawals, the stronger every subsequent legal action would be. Margaret asked how long she had to gather it. The attorney said, "As long as you can manage it." Margaret managed it for 11 months. She was not passive during those 11 months. She was building. She obtained copies of every financial document connected to the estate account and their joint accounts going back 4 years. She worked with a forensic accountant who traced the withdrawn funds through 3 separate accounts Dennis had opened individually, 2 under business names that existed only on paper, and 1 in a state where they had no property or connections. She also, with her attorney's guidance, made contact with her mother's original estate attorney to document the precise terms under which Margaret had authorized Dennis to act during the estate transfer. The documentation she had signed, reviewed in detail, authorized Dennis to execute the transfer of assets. It did not authorize him to withdraw those assets for personal use. The distinction, her attorney explained, was the difference between a civil and a criminal matter. On a Tuesday morning in March, 11 months after she had sat in the bank branch and read the statement, Margaret made 4 phone calls. The first was to her divorce attorney, who filed simultaneously on grounds of marital fraud, financial abuse, and dissipation of marital assets. The second was to the state's Financial Crimes Unit, where her attorney had already established a point of contact and where the forensic accounting file was submitted as a formal criminal complaint. The third was to the bank holding the 3 accounts into which Dennis had distributed the withdrawn funds. They had been notified in advance by the legal team. The accounts were frozen before noon. The fourth call was to Dennis. She told him she would be staying with her sister for a few days and that he should expect correspondence from her attorney. She did not explain further. She did not give him time to ask. She hung up. Dennis spent the following 48 hours attempting to access accounts that no longer responded to his credentials. He called Margaret 17 times. She did not answer. He retained an attorney on the 3rd day. His attorney reviewed the documentation Margaret's team had assembled and told him, in the direct language that good attorneys use when the situation does not benefit from softening, that the available defenses were limited. Dennis entered a negotiated settlement on the civil matter that required full restitution of the $245,000 drawn from assets he held individually, some of which had to be liquidated to meet the obligation. The criminal matter resulted in a formal charge to which he pled guilty to a reduced count, receiving 3 years of supervised probation and a permanent notation on his financial record that precluded him from serving as a fiduciary in any capacity for anyone ever again. Margaret used the returned funds to complete what her mother had intended. She paid off the remaining balance on her own mortgage. She established a small education account for each of her grandchildren. She donated a specific amount to a cause her mother had supported for decades. She sold the house she and Dennis had shared and bought a smaller one with a garden she had always wanted. She told her sister about a year after the divorce was finalized that the 11 months had been the strangest of her life. She said the strangest part was not pretending everything was normal. The strangest part
was how clearly she could think once she had made the decision to act slowly. She said her mother was a careful woman, and that it took her 54 years and one very bad marriage to understand that careful was not the same as passive. Careful meant you waited until you were ready, then you made 4 phone calls, and by noon, it was done.
Story number 2. The Report. Victor had rented the same apartment for 6 years. It was not a remarkable apartment, ground floor of a 4-unit building in a mid-sized city. Reasonable rent, good light in the mornings. A landlord named Stuart who was responsive enough and present enough that the arrangement had always felt basically functional. In the 3rd year of Victor's tenancy, Stuart converted the top-floor apartment, which had previously been occupied by a long-term tenant who moved away, into a short-term rental. Victor noticed because the foot traffic changed. New faces in the stairwell every few days, luggage in the entrance corridor. The specific noise pattern of people who are treating a space as temporary and who therefore relate to it differently than people who live somewhere and intend to stay. He did not object immediately. It was not his building. He had no formal standing to object. But over the following months, several things happened that changed Victor's relationship to the situation. The building's shared utilities were billed collectively and divided between tenants quarterly. His share of the electricity and water bills increased by an amount he could not account for, given that his own usage had not changed. He raised it with Stuart. Stuart said the increases were due to rate hikes from the utility providers. He said it was the same for everyone. He checked. The utility rates had increased by 4%. His share of the bill had increased by 31%. He said nothing more to Stuart. He began keeping records. He photographed the utility bills each quarter. He logged every turnover he could observe in the upper apartment, the dates, the approximate number of guests, the duration of each stay. He checked the short-term rental platforms and found the listing without difficulty. Stuart was charging significant nightly rates for an apartment in a building where the utilities were shared and the costs were being distributed across tenants who had no idea. Then, Victor checked the building's permit status with the city's Housing and Zoning Department. The building was not permitted for short-term rental use. Stuart had not applied for the required conversion permit. He had not registered the unit with the city's short-term rental registry, which the city had introduced 2 years earlier, specifically to regulate this kind of use. He had also not disclosed the commercial use of the building to his property insurer, whose standard residential policy specifically excluded damage or liability arising from commercial rental activity. This was a significant exposure. Victor was a methodical person. He had worked in municipal administration for 12 years before moving to the private sector. He understood documentation the way some people understand music, intuitively and in detail. He spent 6 months building a complete file. The file contained the quarterly utility bills with his annotated analysis of the unexplained increase, the short-term rental listing, archived in full with pricing history, a log of 114 observed guest turnovers across a 26-week observation period, a summary of the city's short-term rental regulations with specific reference to the permit requirements Stuart had not met, a note regarding the insurance policy implications drawn from publicly available information about standard residential coverage, and a brief summary of the relevant tenant protection statutes in their jurisdiction, which included specific provisions regarding landlords who misrepresent operating costs to tenants. On a Monday morning in October, Victor submitted the file. He submitted it in 4 directions simultaneously: to the city's Housing and Zoning Enforcement Office, to the city's Short-Term Rental Compliance Unit, to Stewart's property insurer, identified through public records, and to the city's Tenant Protection Board, with a specific complaint regarding the misrepresented utility billing. Victor sent Stewart a brief email that morning informing him that he had raised some concerns with the relevant regulatory bodies and that Stewart might expect to hear from them. He did not elaborate. He went to work. What followed was not swift. Regulatory processes rarely are, but it was thorough. The Housing and Zoning Office confirmed the permit violations and issued a formal notice requiring the unit to cease short-term rental operations immediately, pending a compliance review. The Short-Term Rental Compliance Unit issued a fine and a registration order, with a timeline for compliance and a penalty for historical non-compliance. Stewart's insurer, upon reviewing the complaint and conducting their own inquiry, determined that the commercial rental activity constituted a material misrepresentation of the property's use and moved to void the existing coverage, which left Stewart personally liable for any incident that had occurred in the upper apartment during the period of uninsured commercial use. This was a significant exposure. The Tenant Protection Board reviewed the utility billing analysis and determined that Victor and the other ground floor tenant had been systematically overbilled to subsidize the operating costs of the commercial upper unit. They ordered a recalculation and reimbursement covering the full period of the short-term rental operation. Stewart spent the following several months in an expensive and complicated process of regulatory compliance, legal negotiation with his insurer, and financial adjustment. He sold the building 18 months later. Victor received a reimbursement check covering 3 years of overbilled utilities. The amount was not life-changing, but the principle it represented was precise, and the documentation that produced it had taken him 6 months and cost him nothing but time and attention. He stayed in the apartment until the building sold. The new owners converted it properly and raised the rents to reflect the market. Victor moved to a different neighborhood. He told a colleague over lunch after it was all finished that the thing people misunderstand about situations like this is that they assume the only options are to accept the situation or to confront it directly and loudly. He said there is almost always a third option. You document the situation completely. You identify the regulatory framework that applies to it. You submit the documentation to the correct authority and let the system do what the system exists to do. He said the system is slow. He said it is imperfect. But he said if you give it something complete and accurate to work with, it is usually sufficient. He said the report was 1 page. Everything else was the 6 months before it.
2 stories in. Margaret waited 11 months. Victor waited 6. Neither of them confronted the person directly until the documentation was complete and the action was already in motion. That is the pattern. The people in today's stories did not act from anger. They acted from preparation. There is a significant difference between a response that is driven by emotion and a response that is driven by evidence. Emotional responses are loud. They give the other person time to react, to reframe, to defend. Evidence-based responses are quiet, right up until the moment they are not. The third story today involves a workplace. A manager who had been taking credit for a subordinate's work for 3 years, and a woman who spent 60 days building something the manager never anticipated and could not dismantle once it was in place.
Story number 3. The email. Diane had joined the research division of a mid-sized consulting firm 8 years before the events of this story. She was a senior analyst. Her function was to produce the foundational research and strategic analysis that the firm's client reports were built on. She was good at it. Her methodology was rigorous, her documentation was thorough, and the reports that incorporated her work had a reputation within the firm for being unusually reliable. Her direct manager was a man named Richard. Richard was the person who presented the research to clients. Richard was the person who attended the senior meetings. Richard was the person who received the performance reviews that commented on the quality of the analysis coming out of their division. For the first few years, Diane had understood this as a structural reality. She was the analyst, he was the manager. He presented, she produced. That was the arrangement. What she had not initially understood was the degree to which Richard had been ensuring that her name was systematically absent from every document, every presentation, and every internal record of the work she had produced. She began to understand it in year 5, when a senior partner at the firm mentioned to her in passing that Richard had presented an exceptional piece of market analysis to a major client the previous month. The partner described the methodology. Diane recognized it immediately. It was hers. She had built the framework 18 months earlier. She had documented it in an internal methodology note that Richard had filed under his own name. She checked the filing. The methodology note bore Richard's name and Richard's title. Her name was not on it. She had written every word of it. She said nothing. She began paying attention differently. Over the following several months, she identified a consistent pattern going back 3 years. 14 pieces of significant analysis she had produced had been presented externally or internally, with Richard named as the author. Her name appeared in none of them. She also identified the consequence of this pattern. Richard had been promoted twice in the 3 years the pattern covered. His performance reviews cited his analytical capability and the exceptional quality of his research outputs. Diane had received standard reviews with standard increments. The research outputs cited in his reviews were hers. Diane thought about this for a long time. She thought about who she could raise it with and what the most likely outcome of each conversation would be. She thought about Richard's standing in the firm, which was established and valued. She thought about her own standing, which was solid but not visible in the way that Richard's was visible, because visibility had been systematically redirected. She decided that a conversation was not the mechanism she needed. What she needed was a record. She spent 60 days building one. She began with her own files. She had kept every draft, every dataset, every working note from every piece of analysis she had produced in her 8 years at the firm. She had kept them in a personal drive out of professional habit and a general preference for order. She went through those files and matched every significant piece of analysis to the corresponding client-facing document or internal record under Richard's name. She created a side-by-side comparison for each instance, showing the working drafts, the dates, her file naming conventions, and the final document under Richard's name. She had 14 complete matches, each one documented from first draft to final published version. Then she reviewed the firm's intellectual property and attribution policy, which was included in the employee handbook and which she had read carefully when she joined. The policy was specific. It required that the originating analyst be credited on any document submitted for client or internal use. It identified attribution misrepresentation as a serious professional conduct violation.
It also contained a whistleblower protection clause that Diane read twice to be certain she understood its scope. On a Monday morning in April, 60 days after she had made the decision, Diane sent one email. It was addressed to the head of the firm's human resources function, the chair of the professional conduct committee, and the managing partner. The email was 4 paragraphs long. The first paragraph identified her role, and her tenure. The second paragraph described the pattern she had identified, citing specific documents, dates, and client engagements. The third paragraph stated that she was submitting a formal professional conduct complaint under the firm's attribution policy and was requesting a formal review. The fourth paragraph noted that she was retaining a copy of all documentation and was aware of her rights under the whistleblower protection clause. Attached to the email was the documentation file. 14 complete instances, each one cross-referenced and dated. She sent it at 8:47 in the morning. She then went to a meeting she had already scheduled for 9 a.m. and spent the next 2 hours discussing an unrelated client project with 2 colleagues. She did not tell Richard she had sent the email. The firm's professional conduct committee was required under its own policy to acknowledge a formal complaint within 48 hours and to initiate a review within 10 business days. They acknowledged it in 6 hours. The review took 3 weeks. The committee reviewed the documentation Diane had submitted. They pulled the originating files from the firm's server. Her file naming conventions, creation timestamps, and the sequential editing history were consistent with her account across all 14 instances. Richard was invited to respond. He was not able to produce documentation that contested the timeline or the authorship on any of the 14 instances. The committee found in Diane's favor on all 14 counts. Richard received a formal conduct violation, was required to submit written corrections to the attribution records on all affected documents, and was placed on a performance improvement plan that effectively ended his trajectory toward the next level of the firm. Diane received a formal acknowledgement of the misattributed work, a retroactive adjustment to her performance record for the 3 years affected, and a compensation review that resulted in a salary correction and a one-time adjustment the firm described as a remediation payment. She did not ask for Richard to be dismissed. That was not what she had requested. She had requested an accurate record. The accurate record had consequences for Richard that she had not specified and did not need to. She stayed at the firm for another 2 years before leaving for a senior role at a different organization, where her name appeared on everything she produced from her first week. She told a friend over dinner sometime after the email that the thing she was most proud of was not the outcome. She was proud of the 60 days. She said that 60 days of building something complete and accurate while continuing to show up and do her work, while saying nothing to Richard, while being entirely certain of what she was doing, was the hardest professional thing she had ever done. She said most people underestimate how much patience costs. She said she had paid the full price and considered it one of the best investments of her career.
3 stories. A woman who waited 11 months, made 4 phone calls, and had her mother's money back by noon. A man who spent 6 months building a file and submitted 1 report that cost a landlord a building. And a woman who spent 60 days documenting 3 years of erasure and sent 1 email that created a permanent and accurate record of who had actually done the work. 3 different situations, 1 consistent approach. None of these people acted from impulse. None of them confronted the person in a parking lot. None of them posted about it publicly or demanded a dramatic acknowledgement. They gathered the information, They built the documentation. They submitted it to the correct authority at the correct time. And then they let the structure do what structures are built to do. The lesson, if there is one, is not about revenge. It is about precision. Knowing what you are dealing with, knowing what mechanisms exist to address it, and being patient enough to use them correctly instead of fast enough to feel better in the moment. The moment always passes. The record stays. If these stories gave you something today, hit the like button. It helps this channel reach more people and tells the algorithm that this kind of content belongs in front of them. Subscribe to Venture and Karma. We are back every single week. Tell me in the comments which of these three resonated most: Margaret and her 4 phone calls, Victor and his 1 report, or Diane and her 60 days. I read every comment. Keep your eyes open, and I will see you in the next one.